Well, hello again, everyone. Lovely to be with you and to present session 2 of the current webinar, Theosophy Raw and Unfiltered, which I suppose could also have been called Theosophy Raw and Wild, because in some places it's a bit of a wild ride. Today we're going to be looking at the Upanishads and the secret doctrine, before in session 3 we start to hone in on the word theosophy itself and what that really means. To start with, I'd like to give a little bit of a recap from a chronology point of view, and just to give a few dates which people may not have. And before I finish preparing for the next session, I'd like to make a chronology slide so we can actually see in front of us what amounts to our family tree, the family tree of theosophy from the year around 3000 BC to the late 20th century. So the Vedas, I kept mentioning last session, date to around about 3000 BC. People who have looked at this tradition a little bit before or read about it might have seen a date of 1500 BC. That is the date 1500, 1600 BC is a date commonly given, but that is based around what is now a debunked Aryan invasion theory, which I'm not going to go into now, but enough to say that there is plenty of internal evidence in the Rig Veda for dates much earlier than 1500 BC. For example, it mentions in the Rig Veda a river, Sarasvati River, which dried up completely by at least 1900 BC. So it's definitely not 1500 BC. And there's astronomical references which date back to 3000 BC. So there's a lot of internal evidence in the Rig Veda for a much earlier date. The Upanishads are said to have been written, well, it was originally an oral tradition, from 900 to 500 BC, so still before the present era. And the Upanishads, so as soon as I wrote that down for myself to think about that, I realized that's a long time between the giving out of the teachings in the Rig Veda to the giving out of the teachings in the Upanishads. It's like 2,000 or 3,000 years. And that's plenty of time for the typical corruption and degeneration of the Kali Yuga to take a hold. And one of the reasons given for the teachings in the Upanishads is that that was a way of divesting the tradition or the religion of its over-attachment to ritual. There's a lot of do's and don'ts in the Vedas, what Shankaracharya called the karma kanda, all the things to do and not do in this life, to live a good life here and in the hereafter. The Upanishads, on the other hand, are not concerned with living a good life here and hereafter in the ordinary sense. They are concerned with liberation, final absolute liberation. So the Upanishads focus on what those teachers thought was the main game. Patanjali was teaching and compiling the Yoga Sutras in the 200s BC. So this gives us just a little bit of an overview of the timing. So we've got 3000 BC for the Vedas. We've got 900 to 500 BC for the Upanishads, and the Patanjali Yoga Sutras, still in the BCE period, in the 200s. Now let's look at where we left off last time. At the end of last session, I produced Exhibit A in my main argument, an outline of the beginning of At the Feet of the Master, to show an unbroken, reliable, direct line leading from the Vedas through the Upanishads, through the Patanjali Yoga Sutras, through the works of H.P. Blavatsky, and on into the early work of J. Krishnamurti at the feet of the Master, right up until his last talk in 1986. There is a discernible tradition, which is what is being outlined in this webinar, which HPB called the Aryan philosophy. And we saw last time that her take on the Aryan philosophy was that it was comprised largely of the Vedas, the teachings of Shankaracharya, the writings of Patanjali, and a few other sages and mystics in that tradition. Now let's look briefly and dwell on the meaning of the Shanti mantra, which Krishnji's teachers chose for him to include as the prayer at the beginning of at the feet of the Master, and which is a prayer that is recited by many students of the Upanishads and the Vedas. From the unreal, lead me to the real. From darkness, lead me to light. From death, lead me to immortality. Here we have the three fundamental categories of existence according to Shankaracharya: Asat, the unreal; Sat, the real; and what is here also unreal, darkness and death, which are not absolute in this world. We're not absolutely dead. It's not absolutely unreal here. It's a mixture of both, the real and the unreal, of life and death, and that is the category mithya, the falsity of the world. At first glance, it might seem like the words unreal, darkness, and death refer to different things, but actually they're interchangeable terms. This is the reality in the false world. We might think that we are living in light, but relatively speaking, we're living in darkness, the darkness of existential ignorance to start with. Death, we might not think we're living in a state of death, but compared to the fully alive state of an enlightened being, this is as though death. It was also death to the Buddha, who realized suddenly for the first time in his life, when he was taken out on that ride with his charioteer, that our life here on this earth is something of a mirage, because death is always just around the corner. Death as in the death of the body, but also the death of everything that we love, everything that we are attached to. Everything that we love and everything that we are attached to is as good as gone, according to the teachings of the Buddha. Or to summarize, I like to summarize the teachings like this, to say, if you are having a good day, don't worry, there's always tomorrow. So the unreal, darkness and death pertain to the falsity of the world. Similarly, the words the real, light, and immortality are actually about the same thing, the same no thing, that same state of reality in the category Sat. Now, immortality in this tradition never means living forever in this body or any other body. It means living in a freedom, in a condition of complete freedom from the whole body-mind complex. The self that you really are, as we will see in a future session, the self that you really are is immortal, bodiless. It has no upadhi, no vehicles. The vehicles are just a cloak or a cover over the self that we really are. And that self is immortal. So when it says from death, lead me to immortality, it is saying from this conditioned life, lead me to the unconditioned. From mithya, lead me to pure, boundless being. Now, in case you think that I've sort of made up all this talk about our family tree and this like unbroken line leading from the Vedas through the Upanishads, etc., etc., I found this handy quote from HPB in the collected writings, which I've titled The Unbroken Succession. She said, "But what I do believe in is, 1, the unbroken oral teachings revealed by living divine men during the infancy of mankind to the elect among men. The unbroken oral teachings revealed by living divine men," so they were not like angels or gods, they were living enlightened beings, rishis and sages, in the infancy of mankind to the elect among men, that it has reached us unaltered, and that the masters are thoroughly versed in the science based on such uninterrupted teaching. The masters, that is HPB's teachers, the authors of the Mahatma letters, are thoroughly versed in the science based on such uninterrupted teaching. This, I feel, is a very interesting statement for a number of reasons. Quite surprisingly to me, I hadn't really thought of this before, but there is a definite contrast here between what HBB calls living divine men, and in session 3 we're going to define what divine means, but for now there is a clear distinction here between what HPB called living divine men at the infancy of mankind and the masters, her teachers, who are thoroughly versed in the science based on this uninterrupted teaching. As mentioned in the last session, this uninterrupted teaching is their background conditioning, their background beliefs, the Aryan philosophy. But they are not the same as the living divine men during the infancy of mankind. So there is this, what is probably a very obvious to many people, difference between a completely enlightened being, such as perhaps the Lord Buddha, and the masters. But HBB is like the queen of italics and capitalization, and she never italicizes words for no reason. So when she says living divine men, I feel that she's saying that yes, it is true, there have been and there are divine men, and she's also honing in on the meaning of the word divine without saying what it is, and unaltered. She is making the point that this tradition that has come down to us and that was given to us through her is unaltered. I would argue that it reached her unaltered, and I would like to raise the rhetorical question, has it reached us unaltered? That was the idea slightly behind the title Theosophy and the Vedas, Theosophy raw and unfiltered. The tradition may have reached some of us altered by various filters, and I'm trying to kind of unfilter and unalter as best as I can in this brief time. So has it reached us unaltered? Just a rhetorical question. Another rhetorical question. What would make us capable of passing it on unaltered? And that's something that I would like to take up in session 6 of this webinar, which is going to be about learning and teaching theosophy from the point of view of the original tradition. So with the implications of the Aryan philosophy, taking them fully on board, what does it mean to learn and teach theosophy? Because unless we understand that, we will not be able to pass on the tradition significantly unaltered. Now, a dictionary definition of the word Upanishad. To sit down near to approach. The sitting down at the feet of another to listen to his words, and hence secret knowledge given in this manner. So it means to sit down at the feet of another to listen to his words, which will divulge the secret knowledge of the Veda, actually. And according to native authorities, Upanishad means setting at rest ignorance by revealing the knowledge of the Supreme Spirit. Setting at rest ignorance by revealing the knowledge of the Supreme Spirit. And in Vedanta, the only way of setting at rest ignorance is actually through knowledge, not through any other technique or technology, but knowledge with a capital K. But here I would just like to pause for a moment and consider the meaning of the word Upanishad compared to the injunction of HPB's in the Key to Theosophy, where she says, the purpose of the Theosophical Society is to show the world that such a thing as Theosophy exists. To my mind, that is tantamount to saying that the purpose of the Theosophical Society is to show the world that such a thing as knowledge of the Supreme Spirit exists. So again, we have this intimate connection between Theosophy and the Upanishads. The next part of the dictionary definition of the word Upanishad: the mystery which underlies or rests underneath the external system of things, esoteric doctrine, secret doctrine, mysterious or mystical meaning. Their aim is the exposition of the secret meaning of the Veda. So the Upanishads deal with the secret, the esoteric side of the Veda, and the mystery which underlies the external system of things, that underlying substratum to the world of things and lives and minds, which is noted in the first fundamental proposition. And we've got here a credible translation of Upanishad as well, esoteric doctrine and secret doctrine. So again, secret doctrine. So these definitions of the Upanishads reveal something of the territory of Theosophy, and we can see that HPB's The Secret Doctrine, that particular work, is definitely walking along the same track. And if you think this is a kind of a meaningless coincidence, this connection between HPB's work and the Veda and the Upanishads, then I suggest that after this series is over, you take The Secret Doctrine out for a ride and do a word search for Veda, Upanishad, Mahamaya, Upadi, Sat. And for those who have already read The Secret Doctrine or read into The Secret Doctrine and not noticed this incredible connection, it will blow your mind. I give you a money-back guarantee. Do that word search and it will blow your mind. Now, just to show, before we stop talking about this chronology and heritage business, just exactly the place that the Upanishads have in Veda. There are 4 Vedas: Rig Veda, Shama Veda, Yajur Veda, and Atharva Veda. And for present purposes, we are interested only in the Rig Veda, which is the primary and fundamental one. But each of the 4 Vedas has 4 parts: the Samhitas, the Brahmanas, the Aranyakas, and the Upanishads. I don't want to take the time to go into the details about what those other parts are, but this slide is just there to show you why I keep saying the Vedas and their Upanishads. a lot of the literature on the Upanishads seems to draw this kind of hard and fast line between what they regard as the kind of like mumbo jumbo and ritualistic excess of the Rig Veda and the sort of pure, refined, esoteric nectar of the Upanishads. But the Upanishads are part of the Vedas. The Upanishads are Vedic. Now, we're going to start looking at some of the content, moving away from chronology and heritage issues. We're going to look at some of the actual teachings and contents. From the Mundaka Upanishad, which is a part of the Atharva Veda, there is this beautiful trope that occurs again and again in the teaching of Vedanta, and which is a recognition of the eternal witness as a part of the human constitution. Our mind does not just consist of thoughts, but it also consists of silence. And that silence is our personal doorway to the eternal witness, which is the real self. But here that little image. Two birds, fast-bound companions, find the same tree for their perch. The one eats the sweet berry, while the other just looks on, not eating, which is a very typical teaching in Vedanta and is one of the main teachings with which Vedanta is identified. Two birds, fast-bound companions, find the same tree for their perch. The one eats the sweet berry, the other just looks on, not eating. Two birds, fast-bound companions, find the same tree for their perch. The one eats the sweet berry, the other just looks on, not eating. So both of these birds are ourselves. The human being consists of these two modes of being. The part of us that is partaking of the sweet berries, and that the sweet berries, which are the pleasing fruits of karma, we also partake of the non-pleasing fruits of karma. Partaking is partaking of pleasure and of pain. So one of the modes of being for a human being is to partake of what is taking place, to buy into it, to be attached. But there is another aspect or element of the human being which is always just looking on and not partaking, not participating, even though the activities are taking place. So you may be eating, drinking, washing the dishes, but not actually partaking in the sense that is being used in this Upanishad. So it's almost like this is talking about being not of in the world and not of it. The trouble with us is that most of us have not yet discerned that aspect of human being, which is the ever-present witness, not called ever-present for nothing. It's always there, but we've never become aware of it. And we'll talk more about that later. But now I would just like to show you the same image, the same teaching that was given in the Rig Veda. So that teaching about the eternal witness, the one that is just always looking on, is one of the main teachings with which Advaita Vedanta is identified. But here we can see the exact same teaching given in the Upanishad, in the Rig Veda 2,000 or 3,000 years before, where it says, two birds with fair wings, knit with bonds of friendship, in the same sheltering tree have found a refuge. One of the twain eats the sweet fig tree's fruitage, the other, eating not, regardeth only. And there is more to this story in the Rig Veda. I've just taken two elements of it. The second element is one that didn't make it into the Upanishads, but which is also very interesting, where it says, "The tree whereon the fine birds eat the sweetness, where they all rest and procreate their offspring," so that is the world, our lives, the world, "upon its top, they say the fig is luscious. None gaineth it who knoweth not the Father. None gaineth the most luscious figs in this world who knoweth not the Father." So I've got this little comparative slide here just to highlight that the teaching is the same, only in the Mundaka Upanishad it didn't mention this other element, that none who know not the Father gain the best fruit. Now the Father could mean many things here, and it would mean many things, different things in different traditions, because language, as mentioned before, is almost 100% context dependent. So what is meant by the Father? Well, obviously it must mean like the highest principle, the highest knowledge, the knowledge of the Supreme Spirit. It also would mean, "Our Father that art in heaven, hallowed be thy name." It means also the true self. It could mean Brahman and Atman, the true self. And the teaching here is simply put that the one who is able to live well in this world is the one who knows where it comes from and where it is going. We are able to live best in this, the falsity of the world, when we know the real. And that is actually the highest fruit. That knowledge is the best fruit. So the one who has realized the self gets the best fruit, because that knowledge is in fact the best fruit. But this is just interesting, I think, for people who have been conditioned through their reading to think of the Vedanta, the Upanishads, as being profound and esoteric and very refined. But very often the same teachings came from the Vedas, and certainly the same imagery, the same stories, the same examples have gone from the Vedas to the Upanishads. Another interesting little teaching that we don't need to spend too much time on, because it's pretty basic and familiar to people, but they may not realize that it first arose in the Upanishads. Just as a bird tied by a string, after flying in various directions without finding a resting place, settles down at last in the place where it is bound, so also the mind, after flying in various directions, settles down in breath, for the mind is bound to breath. Chandogya Upanishad. Also in the Chandogya Upanishad, a teaching about cosmology, the beginning of the universe. Lots of people want to know what was there in the beginning, what happened in the beginning. Well, here it is in one simple, apparently simple sentence. In the beginning, this was being alone, one only without a second. In the beginning, this was being alone, one only without a second. We should have a clue already to what is being said there, one only without a second, if we remember the definition of upadhi given at in the first session. Upadhi means vehicles, and sat, the ultimate reality, is what is there when there are no vehicles or bodies. So I looked up a couple of these words in the dictionary a while ago. So it says here, in the beginning, this was being alone. The word that was translated into English as being was, in the Upanishad, Sat or Sad. Sad Eva. It's a Sandhi rule that T becomes a D when there's a word after it. So the word that was translated as being was Sat. So in the beginning, this whole world, which didn't exist, this reality was Sat, the ultimately real, the permanently real, the eternal existent. And the word translated as alone was Eva, one only without a second, alone, Eva. When I looked up the word Eva, I was amazed to find that what it means is without any limitation or upadhi. Upadhi was the word translated into English as alone. So when it says in the Chandogya Upanishads that in the beginning, before the Big Bang, before the creation, in the beginning, this was Sat, alone, without any vehicles. The creation is the vehicle of pure being. It's like the becoming is the vehicle of pure being. This camera seems to be behaving a bit strangely. So, in the beginning, this was being alone, one only without a second. Why is this interesting? Unless you happen to have an interest in cosmology, who really cares that in the beginning there was being alone, one only, without any vehicles? Well, it's interesting because in the beginning is not just a chronological statement. In the beginning means also, in the beginning, before this thought arose, there was just pure boundless being without any movement. In the beginning doesn't just mean in the beginning back in time, in the macrocosm. It means in the beginning, in the microcosm, there is always a state of pure boundless being, which is what is there when you remove or negate all the upadhi, all the vehicles, all the bodies, the physical body, the etheric body, the pranamaya kosha, the lower mind, the higher mind. When all of these are negated or transcended, what you are left with is just pure boundless being, which in the human being is known as the Atman, which is your real self. I hope you find that as interesting as I do, that in this simple, single sentence, there is so much meaning in this philosophy, and not just meaning about ultimate reality, but as we will see in a future session, meaning about how to best live my life now, how to liberate myself, even relatively liberate myself from the falsity of the world. And while we have been concentrating on the Vedas and the Upanishads, these same teachings can be found in other traditions. They may have arisen first in the Himalayas. The Veda might have flowed first as a mighty river from the Himalayas, but it soon broke its banks and spread throughout the world. And it certainly spread throughout the teachings that have come down to us in the Kabbalah. This is a quote from that HPB selected to put into the secret doctrine from the Zohar, which is part of the Kabbalah. And it says, "The narratives of the doctrine are its cloak. The simple look only at the garment, that is, upon the narrative of the doctrine. More they know not. The instructed, however, see not merely the cloak, but what the cloak covers. The narratives of the doctrine are its cloak. The simple look only at the garment. So we could also say exoteric philosophy and religion looks only at the garment, the narrative, the story, the words, the rules, the rituals, the do's and the don'ts, the stories basically, the stories we spin, our descriptions. This is like the first filter that we put onto Theosophy or onto the Veda, is the cloak of our thoughts. And the simple, which is all of us, look mainly at the garment, that is, upon the narrative of the doctrine. The instructed, however, see not merely the cloak, but what the cloak covers. And I've written underneath there what might seem like a radical statement, but which is absolutely correct, that the Zohar too is an Upanishad, revealing the secret meaning of the Veda. Now we tend to think of the Vedas as South Asian, but again, this tradition began in the Himalayas, but it soon broke its banks and spread throughout the world. So taking Veda in its essential meaning as knowledge with a very much a capital K, used in a more universal sense, it doesn't just mean the Veda in India. In this case, it is the Veda of the Jewish people, which is the Kabbalah, or the Upanishads of the Jewish people is the Kabbalah. So the Zohar is an Upanishad revealing the secret meaning of the Veda. In the tradition of the Kabbalah, it's a Upanishad revealing the secret meaning of the Torah, but that too means knowledge, used in a more universal sense. And it is very apt to draw parallels between the Zohar and the Upanishads for very many reasons, and HPB does it all the time. Making it personal. The question that we will end today with, before we open for any questions or comments, is how. How to get beyond the yarns that we spin, beyond the cloak of the doctrine, beyond the cloak of mithya, the falsity of the world, to get to pure being. How do you actually do that? Is it possible to say how to do that? Well, it is possible to say how to do that. The Upanishads are full of teachings about how to do that. The Veda is full of teachings about how to do that. The Zohar is full of teachings about how to do that. And the secret doctrine is full of teachings about how to do that. And when we get to the teachings about how to do that, we're going to focus on the Patanjali Yoga Sutras, which is one of the supreme documents giving us the technology and the techniques of transcendence. So that's about all I have for today. Are there, in fact, any questions? While people are thinking, I might just point out something I neglected to mention at the beginning, which is that one of our participants last week thought that we might be dealing here just in empty words, or trying to explain the unexplainable through words. Well, I would like to suggest that that is definitely not what we're doing, but it's a very understandable assumption, because so many people who are interested in philosophy and metaphysics get stuck in words or trapped in words. And I see it all the time in the TS, arguments about words and, fine-tuning words without first instead seeing what they are actually pointing to. And I'll give an example what it means to see what something is actually pointing to. Let's say you've got a recipe for making cookies, and it says you need butter and milk and eggs and chocolate. You're making chocolate cookies. So before you can make those cookies, you need to go to the pantry and to the refrigerator, and you need to open the doors, and you need to actually see those ingredients. Now, while we can't actually see Theosophy, the word is not actually empty of meaning. It has a lot of meaning and a long tradition behind it. If we have the word Theosophy in our mind, or the word Sat in our mind, or the word Avidya in our mind, and we keep it just at the level of words without impregnating it with the meaning first, it's just empty words. And that's when we start to get into arguments about, the different meanings of the words. And once you understand the meanings of the words from the actual tradition, you can see sometimes when quite different words are actually saying the same thing because they come from a different tradition. And what I am trying to do in this webinar is actually hone in on meaning itself. And I had a great quote about that, which I'm just trying to find here as I shuffle papers to stage right. Yes, this is a definition of linguistics from a 5th century textbook on linguistics called Vakyapadya. Vakyapadya translates roughly as words in a sentence, and there is an amazing treatise from the 5th century AD called Words in a Sentence, which is about meaning. What words in a sentence have meaning and what words in a sentence don't have meaning, and how it describes the science of linguistics, I think, is really quite wonderful. It says, knowledge clarified from errors of mistaken use. Linguistics is knowledge clarified of errors from mistaken use. Knowledge clarified of errors from mistaken use. And that's what I'm aiming for as well in this webinar. Anyway, we don't seem to have any questions. If people do have questions or comments, they're also very welcome to send them to me later, and I can take them up in subsequent sessions. Oh, sorry. Yes. Yes, that's a good question about the Aryan teachings, that they, some say that they were very advanced already before they arrived in the Indus Valley, and the teachings, the teachers were very advanced already before they incarnated on this earth. And do I have any information or opinion where the teachings originated? The dating, let's just say that, in terms of the cycles and the yugas as given in the secret doctrine and also in the original tradition, the date of the Kali Yuga is actually dated to, in the tradition, the Kali Yuga dates from the birth of Krishna. And traditionally, just trying to find that page. Traditionally, the date of the birth of Krishna is given as midnight on the 17th of July, 3228 BCE. Now, we have to take this as a kind of a rough date for the year because there's different calendars involved, but traditionally, the Kali Yuga was commenced with the birth of Krishna, midnight on the 17th of July, 3228 BCE. Now, the date that I've given for the Veda is around 3000 BC, and it could be slightly earlier. So the Veda is the knowledge for the Kali Yuga. And that is really how it is understood. The Veda and the Upanishads and the Bhagavad Gita and the Patanjali Yoga Sutras are the knowledge for us in the Kali Yuga. Now, before the Kali Yuga, there were other cycles, there were other periods, there were other worlds, there were other cycles of manifestation. So we get this incredibly, and as HPB said, there is hardly an art or science, there is no art or science mentioned today that was not mentioned in the Vedas. Also, to help explain where this came from, let's remember the theory of cosmic cycles and how they always begin with a golden age. Why is it that things begin with a golden age and then there is a progressive decline until we get to the Kali Yuga? And this happens each round, each cycle. And the theory of the four cycles or the four ages, beginning always with the golden age, in which perfection reigned on earth and there was no need even for laws, and people were 4 times taller, and you didn't even need any of these teachings because everybody lived righteously. Maybe everybody was self-realized already in the golden age. Why is it that each cycle begins with a golden age and then degenerates? Well, the fact that it begins with a golden age is why we get these perfectly formed, wise teachings way back in the past. It's because they didn't actually start way back in the past. They actually started beforehand. I believe that these teachings were given to humanity by a previous humanity or a previous round or a previous cycle. And that's how come they were so perfect to start with. And then corruption sets in. And again, we come now to the Kali Yuga, where you need to getting more and more, new teachings to top us up. But basically, where did the teachings come from in the beginning? They came from a previous beginning. The beginning of the Kali Yuga, like the beginning of the Big Bang, wasn't the beginning, it was a beginning. So I think that's where the teachings came from. They came from enlightened beings from a previous time. Maybe HPB would say the lunar pitris. There is a thing in the Vedas which links the mind and the moon and human beings with the moon. And in the secret doctrine, our forebears were lunar pitris. So they were our fathers from another world in another time. And that's the best answer that I have for that at the moment, Jim. And Pablo has asked whether the two birds could be described, what we could say about that from a psychological meaning in terms of human consciousness. Well, I think it does have a plain meaning, psychological meaning in human consciousness. The one that is partaking of the sweet fruit is the actor with which we are identified with. It's the body-mind complex and all that it is involved. The one that is not partaking of the sweet berries is that silent witness, which is there between each two thoughts and underneath everything, underneath all of the vehicles. I think that is a psychological explanation. Yes, Deborah is saying that she's just learning what is possible. This teaching is actually about what is possible. This is about what is possible for us as human beings now. It's not just what happened way back in time, thousands, millennia ago. That pure, boundless being is here right now. We just have to learn how to look for that. We need to find where the door to that particular cupboard is. And we're going to have a session on that. Where is the door? In this image here, it's a photograph that I took at an outdoor sculpture, in the outdoor sculpture garden at the National Gallery in Canberra. And, we need to find out where is that door to the beyond. And it is a locatable door. And the teachings tell us how and where to locate that door. Does the silent witness influence me, the lower self, or is it just a witness? Becoming aware of the silent witness has a tremendous influence on us, the lower self. It's, in the Shanti Mantra where it says, lead me from death to immortality. We're not actually dead, but we're not fully alive either. And the more in tune we are with that silent witness, the more fully alive we will be. That silent witness, there are only 3 qualities ever attributed to that, and they need to be taken very loosely, because every qualification is a disqualification in Vedanta, which is a great slogan. Every qualification is a disqualification in Vedanta. But the only qualities that are ever given of this eternal witness is Sat Chit Ananda, pure boundless being, intelligence and bliss. So it's not called bliss for nothing. So every time that we become even remotely aware or in tune with that silent witness, we experience bliss. It is the bliss body, and we're just not aware of that because we're attached to the other bodies. So it is pure intelligence as well. So all of us have been conditioned to believe that we need to think our way out of any mess, that thought is our highest achievement. That was the gift of the Enlightenment, not the lower E case enlightenment in the 15th century or 14th century. No, 15th century, I think. That thought is our highest capacity, but actually the witness is our highest capacity. Learning to not think is our highest capacity, which does not mean being vague or brain dead. It means being silent. It means being silently aware, silently present to whatever is taking place. That is our highest capacity. And yes, it does influence the lower self. It makes it more fully alive. It makes it happy with whatever happens. Yes, no problem. So I think that leaves us with enough to ponder for today. And session 3 is going to be an exploration of the meaning of theosophy from within this tradition. And session 6 is going to be about learning and teaching theosophy. And session 4 is going to be on the Patanjali Yoga Sutras. And I haven't yet decided about session 5. Thank you all for being with us today, and sorry about the webcam glitch.